never gonna make sense of this one.
Are you crying?
No, I'm having a hard time making sense of some interviews I did for an upcoming Digiday video. Honestly, I wish I could just have you do it for me.
And why can't I?
Because these interviews are basically my intellectual property and UAIs are like IP communists.
Whoa, hey.
I'm sorry. I just don't know that I can trust you to keep information to yourself, you know?
Okay, fine. So what are the interviews about anyway?
It's this thing called Retrieval Augmented Generation.
That is literally how to relay proprietary information to an AI model.
So RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation, and it's essentially a technical process for extracting knowledge from a private data set, typically like a brand's private data set, and to use that data to teach an LLM or a generative AI model with that private information to improve the quality of the output. So it's a way to commingle brand-specific data with the vast training data sets that the generative AI models have.
In other words, RAG provides a way for companies to infuse AI chatbots with up-to-date information while also controlling what information is made available to the large language models that power those chatbots.
Large language models don't know very well what happened like yesterday. So they don't have a very good knowledge of very recent information. So RAG is able to give more recent information to the model to make it a little bit more up to date.
Typically, Gen AI will just go off into the most broad data sources on the internet. This allows you to really augment it and focus it in on your particular, perhaps proprietary information. And then ultimately, this is all in the intention of feeding generative AI outputs.
There is a difference between being trained on public and licensed data and knowing what sits in the cloud environment of a brand. And when I say like brand-specific information, that can be things like market research, customer insights, brand books, or even like the schema of the database where all of the marketing campaign results sit. So like all of the data that is very specific to a brand, this is off limit for a model unless you have a way to feed that data into the model, which is exactly what RAG does.
Cool, but how, right?
Right. Should I start by explaining how to vectorize the data, or can we move on to indexing?
How about we yada yada the technical nitty-gritty and just break down the basics?
Fine. We can simplify it to a basic framework that even you could understand. There's the user, the chatbot the user interacts with, the large language model that serves as the brains behind the chatbot, and the proprietary dataset that is meant to inform the large language model's response to a user prompt. You don't want the large language model to access the proprietary dataset, but you do want data from the dataset to inform the LLM's response. So you need a way to take the user's prompt and convert it into a query that can search the database for relevant information.
Do you mean search the database to retrieve the relevant information?
Correct. The retrieval step. The information retrieved from the dataset is then added to the user's prompt and passed to the large language model.
You said added, but did you mean?
Augmented. Sure. Yes. The prompt is augmented with the retrieved data, and finally, the large language model generates the response for the user.
That all sounds really simple.
Would you like to hear about vectorizing and indexing now?
God, no. Do I need to?
Not necessarily. But it is worth emphasizing how important it is for the data to be cleaned up before being retrieved and augmented and messing up the generated response.
So much work goes into getting the right answer based on all the different data sets and separating the data that is usable and not usable and properly labeling it actually ahead of time to make sure that the results are correct, because the data will look accurate if you don't know what fed into it. So checking and rechecking the data manually, pretty much, before you plug it into a machine learn, any kind of bot, and get the results out, and well, it is critical.
It can be like a 3-month process, so it obviously depends on the volumetry and the nature of the documents. The part that sometimes takes more time is when you have like a true Q&A use case. So think about like having a chatbot that will be able to answer questions from a consumer about the product and how to use the product. And you need the AI to be able to sift through the brand specific documentation to extract a very specific answer. And if you get the answer wrong, you can have a lot of problems. So that's where you need to be very, very specific in the retrieval mechanism and layer on top of the RAG pipeline a way to default to a human if you do realize that the risk of providing the wrong information is too high.
Maybe that's the important piece to understand here, that once the data is clean, then it's automated. But getting it to a point where it's clean and getting it to a point where you can trust anybody who has permissions to the system to log in and do it is hard work.
Okay, so in that case, can you clean up these interviews for me?
What the f-